And these are a lot of the things that Richard is campaigning on, that public sector unions ought to have a right to. And so what this means is that UCW Georgia, we organize all workers who get a check from the University System of Georgia. So UGA, we are only one of, I think, close to 15 chapters, with, I think we're at going past 700 members across the state. But this means that we are a wall-to-wall. We don't organize into bargaining units, which has some advantages, but it has a lot of disadvantages, because we have to organize across lots of different types of workers. That means the ways that we organize, we can't just have a monolith, a one-fits-all kind of organizing. And that's been very challenging for us. The ways that we approach more white-collar staff, white staff, is much easier than it is to even approach lower wage staff that falls into service and maintenance, where we find more predominantly workers of color. And just like Broderick said, in this town, wages are suppressed. And the major suppressor of wages is the University of Georgia, not just in the city, but in the region. And so with this past year, with the pandemic, what we have been fighting for, and we fought successfully at the beginning of the shutdown in March, were for things like emergency paid leave. But now what we are struggling with, and I think that we have to be honest in what we are struggling with, is not only with our organized structure and the ways that we're able to connect with certain workers and not others, unions begin to look a lot like the institution in terms of its demographics. How do we actually empower workers of color when they're very afraid of getting fired for very good reasons?
Seattle, Los Angeles, San Diego. I'm originally from San Diego. The culture and the unionization there is bigger, and it's just because of that. We have leaders that are still educating those new workers that are coming into our industries. But you know, here in the South, in Atlanta, Texas, Denver, that culture has almost disappeared. And the reality is the old leadership really took their role as a leader in the trade union as, I need to conserve what we have. They closed the doors on immigrants. Everyone knows that a good trade union job, if you have that union book, it's a good job, it's a high wage. There's still really good wages here locally if you have that union card, right? If you're able to get in. How do you get in? Well, you knew somebody who maybe you got in, right? So that culture was very existent and still is for a lot of places. I'm happy to say that I'm a part of that change, and we're putting leadership that looks like the workers that we should be representing. But that takes time, right? And I'm happy to be a part of this new change within our building trades, and moving back to what really gives us power, right, is direct action.
Policy shapes landscapes, and if we educate, workers to organize with that in mind, it could be beneficial to future generations. And even like from my own personal story, I worked at the local chicken plant here in Athens around 2003 or 2004. And I'm not sure if they had a union back then, but I later learned maybe a few years back that they have a union now, the poultry here. And so just, I guess, knowing even myself, whether or not they had a union back then, what that means, that speaks volumes, to what you can do as a worker, how you can assert your rights, to guarantee more freedoms for yourself and your family. And so, and to Joey's point, where he was speaking to earlier about trying to reach out to workers that may not look like you, it's important to have workers, Black, Latinx workers, speaking amongst each other, to help share that message if they don't feel comfortable speaking to people outside of their community, because there's just a mistrust there from years and centuries of trauma and exploitation. And so, for those reasons, I think it's very, very important to talk about unions amongst the workers and to organize.
About how to make our workplaces more inclusive and more accessible. I was having conversations with a couple of bartenders and baristas in town about some of the hiring practices that we see our bosses use, and like what it looks like when you walk into bars in town. And then it became very, very quickly apparent that, we can try our best to be inclusive and welcoming, but if the system is still broken, we're just inviting people into the space to be exploited and traumatized. And so how do we fix the root issues, the systemic issues in our workplaces, which the clear answer became organizing and unionizing. So what we are working to do is to provide the solidarity of that coalition to the bartenders in town, to the workers at the salons, to hotel workers, to anyone who needs resources and needs a way to find them. So at this juncture, we're kind of working as a group that kind of fills the gap to give people knowledge and information and to help connect them to the groups that they need to be connected to provide them resources like this. What I have been working a lot on is I've been working with the DSA's restaurant organizing project, with IATSE, which is a theater and stagehand union, nationally, to try and organize restaurant workers so that we can build these larger labor movements in our cities.
I mean, I can speak to one of the local organizations I'm working with Economic Justice Coalition. They're doing a lot of good work in terms of advocacy, and so as it was my understanding that they used to operate as a worker center or advocating around workers' rights, and so they would go to local industries where construction workers were trying to find employment, and they would meet with them weekly. It was a large immigrant population or migrant population. And they would find out what their needs were, find out what their, hang-ups are on the jobs, and they would work with them and have people come and translate and figure out how to best meet their needs. And so, that's kind of the extent a little bit to some of the work that we've been doing locally. As far as like national organizations, I think unions and worker centers kind of work like parallel to one another, and they're kind of like, a lot of cross collaboration there.
So the exposure I have had during, doing the work that we do, is that the worker centers do work hand in hand with labor organizations, but you got a little bit of an advantage. A worker center is not bound by some of the labor laws that labor organizations are. The laws are written there, and I believe the NLRB, when they was first created, was put there to help workers. And today I can completely say that it's there to hurt the workers. A lot of the laws, especially now under the Trump's appointment of NLRB leadership, we were already in a decline, and now they're kicking us while we're down. Basic laws that protected us and protected the workers are being taken away. And in fact, I think we went through the statistics of what the board is actually doing. They filed 7 times more charges against unions since Trump's administration took over, been against employers, right? So what kind of function are they actually, what is their mission? And that's what we're dealing with now. A worker center is not bound by some of those rules and regulations, and they can go out and do the just work that needs to be done.
As the people have the power, and the more people you have, the more power you have. You do get a seat at the table. You are able to negotiate better wages, benefits, pension pay, and on average, union workers make 25% more in wages than non-union workers. They're more likely to have benefits. Communities that have union presence, those workers, even outside the union but adjacent to a union, tend to be treated better in their work environments because employers fear knowing that that's there and that their employees have access to it. So unionizing benefits the entire community and makes everybody's job better the stronger the union presence gets.
Well, first off, it has to come from the workers. So, we have a campaign now. In fact, we just filed a petition, I believe it was 2 weeks ago. And when I say petition, I mean the workers actually started holding meetings on their issues and collectively talking about it. Okay, what are we going to do? We started meeting at a park after work once a week. And we just started doing exactly what I'm touching on, right? And we moved to the point of talking about what our next steps are and what an action is going to be. Legally, we did move to get majority of the company in meetings, and they went from being afraid to ready to do an action. And so that's what we did. It's a glazing facility. They do glass work for residential and commercial and high-rise buildings. They're extremely underpaid for the industry. They're making $14 to $16. The majority of the hard work is in the field. The majority of the hard work demographic is all black, few Hispanic, few Latinx. Everyone in the shop, white and related. So, and you know what? It's like that in a lot of places. And that's just the reality. We have the numbers that back that claim as well. But the issues there were respect, treatment, no raises, favoritism, and in the political climate we're living in, when they started talking about the community rising and marching, Black Lives Matter, the employers didn't like that. And they were having a simple conversation on their time off about politics. And so the discussion got heated really quick. Management did not like the position that the workers were taking, and essentially said that Black lives don't matter, and they next day put I believe it was just a couple of the black workers that were in the shop were forced to work in the field on what they called the hood projects, because that's where you're going to go work. So besides those issues, the no pay, hired and fired at-will employees, we started to organize. The majority of the workers were ready. We had our meeting, and the day we filed the petition with the National Labor Relations Board, we did what's called the walk on the boss. You go into the boss's office, you ask him to sit down respectfully as an equal and mediate the issues. We have a coalition we've been building in Atlanta, and we got the coalition involved, right? The point here is to resolve the problems, not create more. But we do ask that they be resolved and through a contract. So the employer gritted his teeth, got read, took the letter, and did not respond. So we filed the petition with the labor board, and we have an election pending. That being said, if the workers vote to unionize, then they would have to be, they're forced into what's called a bargaining order, where they have to sit down with our elected stewards, committee, and representatives to negotiate a union agreement. But since then, the company has hired what they call labor consultants. We call them union busters. And their main purpose is to go in and divide what the workers have built for themselves. And if that doesn't work, intimidate. And if that doesn't work, buy it off. Because even if, all of this stuff a lot of it is illegal, right? If there's laws, National Labor Relations Board sets so that, it's supposed to be a free and clear election, right? We're not getting that in our communities. Do you think we're going to get that in an employer's facility? No. It's not fair. The pressure is hard. The workers are feeling it, and they're feeling it now. And we're in the middle of it. In fact, that's what our team is doing this weekend, is visiting workers to see how they're doing, because this is their campaign. We're only here to support them. We did go public on them last week, and we're hoping, our goal is always to resolve the issues, but we do need the community to support us on this and to support them, because it's not an easy task. This is their livelihoods at stake, and if anyone could come out the next time we're having an action, we would really appreciate it, because when they see that we're not by ourselves, we're going to get them to the table, and that's our goal.
About political education, labor education. Again, especially in communities and regions where there is either massive amounts of misinformation about labor organizing and about unions, or there is a lot of fear around it. And prioritizing not just talking to workers, but getting workers all in a room together or all close by so that they can share stories with each other about what they may feel afraid to talk about in the workplace, or what they may already be talking about in the workplace, but they want a place to talk more about it. If you have workers who are afraid to organize, then you're having to work against two profound forces. One, the employer, and then two, fear. So I would say political organizing, political education is paramount to my mind, and not just in the workplace, but in the community.
Now, I think we have a different kind of labor legislation that should be instituted. And we can start by eliminating unemployment, as well as any kind of poverty income. We can mandate a federal job guarantee, and that is of decisive importance, not just for eliminating the scourge of unemployment and eliminating such things as the school-to-prison pipeline, mass incarceration, recidivism, the plight of veterans who come back and have no work and fall into homelessness. But we can also have tied to a federal job guarantee, a fair national minimum wage, which should not be $15 an hour, which is a poverty wage, even though it's far above our current minimum wage. But on all accounts, you need at least $20 an hour, and it should be something that keeps pace with not just inflation, but our national productivity, so that all boats rise as our national prosperity increases. This is one key part of a social rights agenda that, if it were made law, would produce the tightest of labor markets, which would instantly empower employees to be able to fight for their rights. Because now employers would have no reserve army of the unemployed to deal with. They would have a reserve army of the employed. And it would lift the fear of firing that presents such a damper in our country to blowing the whistle on all sorts of employee misconduct. Now, in addition, we need to follow other nations in having paid leave, paid parental leave, at least 1 month paid holidays, ban mandatory overtime. But we also have to think about making the whole process of unionization much easier than it is today. It should be as automatic as possible. In fact, we should recognize that just as we have a right to elect representatives in our municipalities, in our states, in our nation as a whole, we should be able to actually elect our representatives in our workplace to negotiate for us. And there should be automatic elections. We should not have to sign a certain number of cards to have an election for who will represent us, any more than we have to sign a number of cards before we have a vote for who will be our mayor or city councilor. And in addition, we need to have seats on corporate boards. And when I say that, I mean both in public and private enterprises. We need to have 50% of the seats for employees who are elected by their employers. And that will change from within what corporations, both public and private, are doing, and do things that the union itself is not in a position to be able to do. And I think those are two crucial measures that will allow employees to have fair empowerment. And these are things that can only be done, obviously, if we elect candidates who support them, or push candidates, or push our officials to support measures like this, where we unleash the proper rights of employees by having the right kind of legislation. And that's what I'm trying to put on the table of political discussion in this election. Thank you.
Thanks, Richard.